So good morning. A real pleasure to have you with us. Let me introduce you, co-producer of the film The Girl with the Needle, and we are going to talk about the Danish model. So I will start with my first question. Is there a Danish model for producing?
For producing? Obviously there is a Danish model because we are Danes. So you always produce based on who you are. But I think I'll just introduce myself a little further because I now work as head of fiction at the Danish Film Institute, meaning I support the filmmakers. But I've been a producer for 30 years. I've had independent production companies, and I've had companies that do very commercial film, documentaries, very artistic films, actually a variety of films, and I've always produced the films that I feel that ignites myself. So, and I think if you ask for a Danish model, I think that could maybe be the Danish model, that I think we as an industry work creatively towards the best film and with the material where we feel comfortable and where we feel challenged. I went to the Danish Film Institute and became head of fiction there after producing for so many years because they actually asked me if I was interested. I don't think I would ever have swapped because I really loved my work, but I swapped, and I think it's very interesting to actually start seeing the film industry in a much broader perspective. So today I see the film industry as a 5-year period, what's ahead of us, what's happening in Europe, how do we base our decisions, how do we base our strategies, etc. Whereas a producer, you much more on one project, you run with the project, you succeed or you fail, and then you're on to next project. So it's a very different position I have today, and I think it's extremely interesting. And I think what I've really learned, and just to before we go into the Danish Film Institute, I can maybe talk a little bit about Europe. I think we all know that Europe has a overproduction of films these days. We produce more films that the audience can actually, that they either want to see, have time to see, or are they home in the couch instead, or do they actually go to the cinemas? There is an overproduction, and why do we have an overproduction? I think this leads us into a model in the Danish industry that might be different from other models in Europe. And I'm not an expert on European models, but there is a model, when you talk about cultural support, you can say you either support production companies and the business and the flow of the business, or you actually go in and support artistic projects. And with artistic projects, I mean, Danish Film Institute is not an institute that supports business. We support projects.
Authors.
Always? Yeah.
Authors.
Yeah, I mean, we support films, TV series. We actually have podcasts as well. We have, variety. I can get into that later. But I think that's an essence, we don't have slate funding, for example. We don't support one company that comes in and is interested in, giving in 5 projects, and then we support those 5 and we see which projects that survive. We actually support one project at a time when it comes in. I mean, we support like 400, over in total, maybe a year, or at least we receive 400, I think, applications, but we support only the artistic vision in the beginning. So, yeah.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So would that be your criteria to select the projects that you receive?
Yeah, so I would just, maybe I should just briefly touch the scheme we have, the different schemes we have. So we have goals from the, together with the Ministry of Culture, we of course have goals for how do we have to succeed every year. And they're very easy actually, they're very simple. We have to reach 29% market share of Danish films in Denmark. We have to, tickets, yeah. Not films, not box office, but admissions.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we have at least 10, we need to have an average of 10 films that make more than 200,000 tickets in the cinemas. And then we need to be at 10 international film festivals a year. So those 3 goals, of course, says you have to be present in the market, because the Danish population has to see Danish films. That's what we make them for. We make them for the audience. We don't make them for the filmmakers, right? That's of course our goal. We have to find an audience. We have to find 10 films every year that collect these audience, so a lot of people see the same films, because that's also a way of creating conversations about who we are, why we are. And then of course we have to be present at festivals, meaning we have to have a high level of artistic impact as well. And with these 3 goals, a system is designed to actually reach them. And I'll go briefly into that, saying we have a market scheme, it's called the commercial scheme, and that's the decision makers is an editorial group. It's 5 people, 3 from the industry, and 2 from the Danish Film Institute, where I'm one of them. And then the other one is a person who only works with distribution, so is very trained and very knowledgeable about distribution and audience, and then myself, and then 3 others that are actually chosen from the industry. They actually point out 3. So we have 5 in that commercial, and we support like 7 to 9 film every year. We have, of course, we have a talent scheme, which is pretty well known. And then we have we call it consultant teams, meaning we have 3 in fiction. We have 3 editors that on their own subjective knowledge actually choose the projects that they would like to proceed with in script, in development, and in production support. Yeah. So these schemes, so it's designed very clever, and it's all designed before I arrived, so I can easily praise the system. But this is a very well functioning structure to actually support the output that goes into cinema. So the Film Institute is and then you budget. Of course, we then budget. How do we best support each scheme? What is necessary budget-wise to actually make it happen? This is it's actually very simple, but it works really well. We have no automatic support. And I think that's a huge advantage. So whenever filmmakers want to make a film, and they actually meet and discuss with a person. They don't just send in things to a machine and there's numbers, you have to fill out, It's actually really valuable to have conversations. Of course, when I talk about the meet people, it's all the people who are not rejected. We had an editorial, a consultant ending his term. They're only there 5 years. They can't stay after 5 years. You have to have a flow.
Very healthy.
Very healthy. So after 5 years he left, and we just looked at how many applications, how many films he supported. He had 500 applications in those 5 years. And
500 in 5 years?
500 in 5 years, and 20 production supports.
Okay, so there's
a lot of no's, there's a lot of rejections, there's a lot of those, there was obviously a lot had received production support. Development support, But you know, and which is also healthy for a system, because people try things out, you know, they experiment, they try things out. Somebody, you know, some of the filmmakers pull out themselves, and some are rejected because the level never really rose to where you actually were supposed to be. So, but 20 out of 500, which also seems, you know, it shows how difficult it is to actually get through the system. And this I think is also really interesting, because we do spend a lot of money on development, and this is a key for me also to success. Keep developing, keep writing, keep pushing yourself. You're in the middle of your script writing, then you get further support for casting, location scout, tryout. Okay, did you fail? Yes, I failed. Let's go in the other direction. This is, you know, keep focusing, keep training yourself, keep getting better and better, and keep the process going, which is a healthy way of knowing the material you actually have in your hands until support.
So you're really holding hands all the way.
We hold hands, but mostly, you know, it's up to the filmmakers what they want to do. If it's reasonable, then we pay out, you know, the support for it. But we hold hands in the sense that we keep supporting them in development. And I think this was, I might be mistaken, but I think it was in the 90s where development support actually became a huge turnaround for the industry. Because that's where, also because minor companies, it's very difficult for them to actually pay for this support. But it's so important. I mean, just research, simply. Yeah. You know, you're writing about a subject. Do you know enough? Is it
documentation? Of
documentation.
Course, yeah.
What? And this is what gives fuels to a story. That's research. That could be one thing, but research could be many things. That could be casting. That, you know, who the actor,
scouting, as you just mentioned.
Scouting, everything. You know, financing. How does the finance support your story? How does the story support your finance? You know, everything goes in. So development was a huge turnaround for Danish film when that was actually probably introduced and used as a tool in filmmaking.
So it's been going on since the 90s.
Yeah,
so you've got a really well polished and established system.
Yeah, there was a really well working system. Yeah.
Can I ask you, how is it to see things from the other side of the fence? Now, because this happened to us here in Spain, in Andalusia, colleagues who were producers and moved to the other side, to choosing to be working for public broadcasters that have to choose in between these 500 to 20. How is it for you now?
So mind you, I've worked with the Danish system, the support system for 30 years. So
on the other side.
Yeah, so I've written like tons of applications. I've had a lot of money. I've received a lot of funding, but I've also had a lot of rejections. So, because that's part of making film. You know, we get rejections all the day. Every day. So I've had, you know, I've known both sides in many ways. But it is different in the sense that all of a sudden you do understand why this system works as it works.
Why the no's are no's.
Yeah, because of course, sometimes when you're an outsider, it's difficult to understand. But I also think that it's essential, and I think the Film Institute and regional funding, they have a huge responsibility when they hire people. Hire people who understand what the film industry is. What is the struggle for the producer's everyday life? What's the struggle for the artistic, you know, crew every day? And I think this understanding, you know, we have rules. It's taxpayers' money. It's a lot of taxpayers' money that we pay out. Of course, we have to have the legal side, you know, straight all the time. But at the same time, we have wiggle room, you know, in understanding what is necessary, what is not necessary. When we receive applications, why do they want to do this? Why do they not want to do this? Can we actually guide them also to say, if you apply for a little bit more, you could actually also do this, which would be, you know, and just have a proper guidance of how you use this system, because the Film Institute is for the filmmakers and the audience. It's not for us.
Yeah, and as you said, is very rightly, is taxpayers' money, is your accountability to what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
But to me, it feels that the type of work you do, which is really accompanying and guiding, it makes the projects better, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we are the best guiders, but I think if I would say we are successful if we can ask the right questions. And by asking questions, we start a conversation within the artistic with the team of producers and writers and directors and whoever. So I think that's very much our role, is to maybe see how can we ask the right questions at the right time and how can we guide them the best. It could also be guiding in finance, because we have, producers. As I said, I've shot mostly all over Europe, but I never co-produced with Spain. So how do we do this?
Yet.
How do I, who do we reach out to? But it would be lovely to say, can you reach out to the Danish Film Institute and actually get guidance in how to co-produce with Spain? I mean, I'm before Google, and it was absolutely much more difficult at the time before. But you can access so much information today yourself. But at the same time, do's and don'ts, recommendation, be aware. Cash flow, for example. Spain, tax rebate, cash flow. Ooh, that's difficult. What do you do? And I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying be precautious, because for a smaller company, Spain is a tricky co-production country cash flow-wise. It's not that we can't solve it. It's just, and it's the same thing with Canada, for example. I've shot a lot in Canada. It's very tricky because at least it was, maybe it has changed, but it was like, you get the money in quite late in your production. Whereas other countries, the cash flow pays out the day after the shoot almost. You do your accounting, boom, the cash comes in and you're safe. But for a smaller company, 1 million euro can be a lot of money to have in your
bank account, waiting for you to start turning your camera on.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things, and that's where we can come in handy. That's where we can say, okay, the structure of your finance, how does it connect with your budget? All these things. So every consultant and every editorial group in the Film Institute has a team around them, and obviously there is an artistic decision maker, and then there is a producer who comes from the industry, he knows how to budget, finance, etc. But there's also, and I think this is a real thing that has changed the Danish Film Institute after development, and something I think every institute in every country should work with, is they have a person called, what do we call them in English?
A lawyer.
No, exactly not the lawyer.
Exactly, yeah.
We have one lawyer, actually, within the whole...
Minimum.
Yeah, we have minimum. But also because we have our rules and we know how to, but it's actually a person who stands for distribution. So we support distribution of each film, but this person is also responsible of guiding in regards to distribution, but also we have a scheme that's called audience focus. And this, I think, has made a huge change with the last 5 years in Denmark. So we all know that Corona gave a huge setback on people getting out of the couch every night. People got used to being home. So the numbers, the admissions are not the same after Corona. We're really struggling in Denmark, and we're almost there, but we are not there yet. And I think it was 5 years ago, this audience focus actually was a scheme that was introduced. And the scheme is it took some time to develop. But you take your script to a focus group, you could call it. And this focus group is trained, they're not trained, the focus group is not trained, but the company that
selects the people attending the focus groups. Yeah.
They're trained, they know what they're doing.
Representative of the population.
Yeah, you simply, and I say this is in a very easy explanation, but you simply take the scripts to a focus group, and they give you feedback. And I think the easiest example is actually for children. So how many filmmakers, I've written I don't know, between 50 and 100 programs for children myself as an author. And I did it when I was maybe, I don't know, 30, 35. I was at least, my point is I wasn't a child, but I was writing for children. And often we see filmmakers that are much older writing for children, but they write for a generation they knew back then. They might have grandchildren, which is always fine, and they feel that, their two grandchildren, they really like the story, but they are also kind of similar to their grandparents. So how do we actually make sure that the stories we write for children actually reach a broader audience as children are today? So they actually present the script for children in the target group.
That's great.
How is the language? What is it about? Is it too educational? We have a tendency as older, when we write for youngers, to be educational. We want to teach them something, which is a noble thing. But if it becomes too educational, it becomes boring. How do they connect with their emotional system? Where are you as a 6-year-old? What are you dealing with? So the aim is naturally not to take the filmmaker's artistic point of view out of the script. It's the contrary. It's to enhance the artistic views and targets, but also reach the target group that you are actually
access to
to
immediate feedback.
Yeah.
And it's called audience focus in your institute.
Yeah, and it's I think it's being copied now in different countries in Europe, because we actually see that it's a very helpful tool. And I remember when I was a producer and they introduced it, I was like, do they want to mess with our artistic, interpretation of a film? I was reluctant. But I think that the industry, myself inclusive, has adapted to the idea that if we do not really acknowledge that there is an audience out there to receive it, then we fail. I can also give a totally different example, and I'll talk about this later today, because I also produced a film called Girl with a Needle. That was, we never ever thought about the audience. We just, pressed the gas pedal for the artistic, journey.
Film daughter.
Yeah, it was a real fun. So I'm not saying this is something that should or would or can work every time, but I think for certain
targets
or scripts or filmmakers, it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And we now see, this is what is even, and we support this process. And we now see that the filmmakers are actually starting their own way of doing audio.
Reproducing it themselves, right?
Yeah, and they say, we love your system, but we would like to do it this way. And this is what systemic changes from a film institute can actually do for the industry. And so that's also why I introduced it with, I think it's very successful, because it was something that was introduced by the Film Institute 5 years ago. The business was reluctant, or the industry was reluctant to take it. It took time to actually keep going, keep working, keep believing in it. And today we actually have application for this, filmmakers who want support, but they want to do it their own way. And that's like, yoo-hoo.
So you give funding and they organize their own focus groups.
Yeah, which is...
Fine.
Or they say, we don't want focus groups, we want to do it this way or this way. We just want to invite to, talk about it in a different way. Either or, the fact is that a lot, more filmmakers are actually aware of the audience.
I was going to ask, because I thought it was only for the 20 projects that you work with, but it's a service that you have available to the film industry?
Yeah, but it's during the development. So it's either during development or once you have done your film. It could also be, how do we position it? It could be different things. It could be, if you have done you guys will probably know, we have a Danish author called Jussi Adler. He does the Afdeling Q, Department Q film. They're actually also at Netflix now as a British TV show. But it's what you could call a franchise. I don't like that word, but in lack of better words. They've done 4 films, and they got a little slow in the audience, and so they actually applied for a huge investigation with the public, public money, and also they paid some themselves, the producers, and they went out to these focus groups and saying, what are we doing wrong? How do you perceive the films right now? And then it was rebranded, and the next film produced right after was a huge success.
It's market research.
Yeah, and I actually produced that film as well. So I was part of this group. It was
your previous.
Yeah. So, but it was just to say it was really, really helpful, because I don't think we as producers would have been as clever, and to say they wanted the humor back, they wanted this back, they wanted that back, and we were like, okay, let's try to work that. I think we took like 3 key points and worked with those. We did the script, the creators did the script as they pleased, and how they wanted the film to be, but it was actually focused on what we knew the audience wanted to see. So, and it was a really good success.
It sounds like you've managed to achieve this great balance between supporting and allowing for creativity to operate.
Yeah, I think that's what the Film Institute system actually can do.
I was wondering if there are any questions from you guys, from or if you want to take part in the conversation.
Otherwise, we can move on.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't here the whole time, but how do you cope with the fact that this commission and editor system for artistic projects, have people from the industry?
Yeah.
How do you keep the balance of, to have this as a film body, to have some neutrality, but at the end you are an experienced producer. When it is limited for certain years, I think. And how long are you as professional producer, now head of fiction of the Danish Film Institute? How long would it take? When you go back, do you have any kind of time that you cannot produce, or how do you cope with that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I don't have a limited employment. You could argue if that's right or wrong. But to tell you the truth, if it has taken, I've now been there nearly 2 years, and I think it takes at least 2 years to get really around what we're doing. So 5 years would be a very short time for a person like me. I'll see how long I'll stay, but that's from a personal perspective, saying, how long when do I long back or whatever. But from the Film Institute side, I think it's very tricky if you are a shorter period, that like 6-8 years, also because you do the political work takes a long time. So if I was only there for shorter, you wouldn't really get the time to actually work really around your job. But for the film commissioners, I think, as it is quite subjective, how they use their own voice, they use their own mind to actually decide what to support or not. I think 5 years is reasonable, because as a filmmaker, it can be very difficult if you don't connect with the artistic voice somehow, as with the film commissioner. So it can be tricky. That's why we have 3 commissioning editors. So you can actually choose from different ones and different schemes, and so you can move around. And it's sometimes tricky to get to get people to actually work, because people would like to create their own stuff. Why do they stop? But that could be personal reasons, or as me, super curious. How can I actually be part of changing the Danish Film Institute, or just supporting the Danish Film Institute? How can I use my experience to actually say, okay, how can we lift the filmmakers? What can I do to be very ambitious and say, what can I do to service you? And I think that should be the energy. And once they've been there for 5 years, I think they have a two months period where they're paid. at least as it is now. I think it's different in Norway. They have like 6 months, so the second they stop, they have 6 months before they can actually start working in the industry. I'm not sure what I think is right. I haven't really made up my mind yet. I don't see it as a huge issue. The thing is, mind you, we're a very small country, and everybody knows everybody in the film industry. So we are very precautious on who is dealing with who. If you're too well connected, you're pulled out of the project. I am too. We all are. So of course you know people, you probably work with people, but the thing is also, as you know, at the film industry you get very friendly with each other. And I think it's partly because we work so much with emotional stuff that it's very difficult not to get hooked up in a personal level somehow. So easily we become each other's friends. So there is a distinction of when you can actually enter into a project and when you can't. If you have a professional relations, you cannot. If you participate birthdays, you can't. Then you're not, you have to step out of the room entirely. So, but I think it works well, and I think there are sometimes issues when they leave the business, when they come into the Film Institute, can be. But I think we manage to just to work around it, and we talk to a lawyer about it all the time. Where are we on the borderline here? So we always keep very clean in who is making decisions towards who. Yeah, I think there's something else to talk about when we talk about the Danish model, because tax incentive is, of course, something that's been known all over Europe. I have myself had a lot of benefits out of tax incentives all over Europe. I've shot in almost every country. I financed, co-produced, etc. Now, for a year ago, I think there was 2 countries in Europe who didn't have a tax incentive, and I think one is Albania and the other one is Denmark. And when you talk about the integrity of Danish film, I must say that I do believe that not having a tax incentive has also resulted in a huge integrity, because tax incentives are normally an automatic system. That's something we have tried to avoid. Now we will have tax incentive this January, which is really, really wonderful, because it's also very tricky to finance films these days. And the Danish Film Institute can't give enough support. So the tax incentive will definitely help the industry, and not only the filmmakers, but also the crews. The crews needs, they need more work on their slate, to make a living out of what they do. And I think hopefully it will also be good for the industry in the sense that we could also be too closed around ourselves. Now, where do we get inspiration from? How do we get better? How do the crews get better? That is actually also from the outside crews that comes into Denmark, work differently, and teach us and inspire us to work in different ways. So by January, we will also be a more generous country to co-produce with. Right now we have a co-production scheme, but we don't have a lot of money for co-production. And if we get co-production applications from all over Europe, it's not a lot of minor films that we do, major and minor productions. It's not a lot we do. I'm sorry, but I can't remember the exact number, but it's of course we are a smaller country, we can't receive that many because we can't support them, and the support we come up with when we don't have a tax incentive is not that attractive. So so this incentive is also to support our own larger budget films to stay in Denmark and not travel as much.
It makes sense,
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, where it comes from. Yeah, we try and promote the local industry and shooting, right?
Yeah. I think another perspective, we have had when we talk about the Danish system, we have had a very wonderful film school who's been extremely clever with developing artistic talents. And of course, it all starts with the youth. You know, we're just supporting talent, just supporting. But there needs to be talent. We need to have a kindergarten where everybody can grow and be experimental. And I think also the free spirit in Denmark is very, very interesting when we talk about the Danish films we do. Because when you see a variety of Danish films, they are in, you know, the content is a free-spirited filmmaker doing their stories, and I think that's also very much part of you can say, if I may say so, I didn't create it, but of the Danish success, because we do have a...
It's your identity, if you start from kindergarten and keep that...
It is an identity. What we then... we've produced many dramas in Denmark. I mean, it's been a drama nation for many, many years, and we are now... I remember when the first, you know, real comedy came out. It was like, wow, can we do these films? Do you remember Susanne Bier's, you know, the eneste ene, I don't know what's called in English, I'm sorry. But that was like a revelation. Can that kind of film be done in Denmark? You know,
we can be funny.
Yeah, we can also be funny. We don't have to be, you know, like this all the time. So, so we're exploring more and more genres, which is really, really interesting. But obviously, I think a tradition has been our nature, but it's also been a budget thing. You know, doing the huge heist films, they're difficult with smaller budget. Although we are very good in Denmark to work with smaller budgets. We work with smaller crews, and we are, you know, it's very intensive. The productions are very intensive. Yeah.
Obviously. I don't know, you mentioned earlier, maybe we can talk about that, because, well, today we have the European Film Academy announcing the nominees for the awards, and you mentioned earlier at the beginning about the overproduction of films in Europe, and if you agree, maybe I indeed can open the floor to questions and comments from the audience. Otherwise, can we talk about the European filmmaking and your take on it? I mean, overproduction because of the platforms, the streamers being there.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this, but we can just talk about it briefly. But what I'm referring to is data. So we see a lot of data we have an overproduction, we have a lot of first-time directors who doesn't make their second film. What does that mean? You know, how are we actually selecting projects? There might be other reasons that I oversee here, but I think it's just interesting data that we have so many first-time directors and they don't make the second film. It might be they actually move over to TV series, etc. But then again, they should also make films, you know, because otherwise the film industry, it doesn't sound healthy. So I think it's very interesting to actually see how do we select films. And I know that a lot of selecting systems become more and more automatic, and I think that's a huge danger. For me, film is dialogue.
Indeed. Do you want the mic?
That is something that happens everywhere. I mean, and markets and forums, me that I work for a long time, sometimes we have like a kind of the feeling that we are failing, because we push people to produce, and actually the system is not sustainable. So they don't really. We are not putting to finish the film to at the end of the bottle. At the end of the is totally collapsed in distribution, and we maybe need to put more focus in the end and how to help, and don't make a lot of frustrated filmmakers. That is my fear, because they can make the first film. It's very complicated to make the second one. Actually, sometimes the second one, they become producers because it's more complicated to find a producer, and how to make that actually the industry is sustainable for having long careers, not just make the first film, but to make a long career.
But if we go back to my initial comment about how do we support films? Do we support production companies, or do we support really artistic projects? And I think there is also something to about how many production companies do we need in Europe, or producers? what is sustainable, not what we need, but what is sustainable. Because I think it also refers back to the fact that when I started, your income was not the production, your income was the box office. DVD, selling of a DVD, So where's the living? How do you make your living out of producing? You live because you produce. And this gives an urge to be in production all the time, instead of maybe do fewer films, live off your admissions. So this also gives like an unhealthy ecosystem.
Totally. Yes,
But that's where I think the systems, and I now represent a system, they have to acknowledge that, like we in our goals with the Ministry of Culture, we say we have to produce 20 to 26 films a year. Now we could, in principle, if we didn't have this number, we could also say, okay, let's support double filmmakers, half the budget, and make 35 films a year. But what would happen? The system will collapse in Denmark, because nobody will go and watch the films, because smaller groups will go, nobody could live on their income. Will they receive a minimum guarantee, in production? No, they won't. They will be lower and lower. So that's where I think we have a responsibility of making systems that are sustainable. And not just systems, and I say this, and I should be careful, I know, but not just systems where a regional fund can say, oh, we made this many films, or another regional fund, and they put their stamp, and we put our stamp on the film and say, aren't we successful? We produced the film on this and this festival. We have to be responsible for the output, the outcome of the country that we represent, and for the audience in the country.
And also that is why, because every year we receive the market like maybe 40, 45 projects every year, that we show, we pitch, etc. We don't need to look so much at that, how many of those films are films at the end. And that is the income. That is when actually we feel that we are useful and we are doing a good job. If those projects become films and they find someone who is going to distribute, who is going to exhibit, and is going to end the film to give maybe more money into finishing money too. So the people can really live, because if not, they have 5 films that they are not able to finish, and they enter in a kind of a loop of not desperate with 5 years with the same film. It's very frustrating, and filmmakers, they are very resilient people, because they receive a lot of no's and because they really have to fight. But we need also to help, and I know that everything is connected, and it's a kind of a loop, because media is also asking for figures, and we need to be more and bigger and that, but we need maybe to size down, don't ask so many projects to the markets, don't to make so many production, and to try to open the neck of the bottle at the end, and use the libraries, there is other ways to distribution, other ways to show pictures.
And that's where, when we work with the audience focus scheme, we also are very aware of how is this film, one thing is how will it be received by the audience, but also how is it actually distributed? Are there alternative methods? Would it be interesting to actually co-produce a podcast? We also support podcast. To how do we actually blow this up so the one production becomes much bigger than it is itself? Do you know what I mean? So I totally with you that, and we do support distribution as well, and we have.
You mentioned you have a distribution person within.
We have within each team that works with the distribution companies and the filmmakers. It's not that we do their work, definitely not. They're the ones, ruling things and doing things, but we make sure that we can give advice, etc. And I think that's our responsibility as a system. And I think if we only have vanity about how we spend our money, to be present everywhere, I think we fail.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's the mix. Well, I guess if there are no further questions, I just want to thank you for sharing, and starting with the beginning. after listening and talking with you for this session, I think there is clearly a Danish model that works, obviously, and my impression would be that you've managed to create the right balance of accountability, of a healthy composition of your system to really account for and be in touch with the industry to support them in the right way so that their creativity is intact. But by asking the right questions and challenging their preconceived ideas, maybe you guide them through, and it sounds like it works. These 20 projects.
Yeah, and that said, you always have to be aware of the fact that the world outside the building of a film institute changes every day. And if we are not in tune with the world and how they work, what's happening out there. So the Danish model is just a Danish model. It's this kind of model today, but it's hopefully we are awake and we listen to the filmmakers, because that's the most important thing to do. Every day when I speak to filmmakers, how does it resonate? How do we help them the best way this day? Because tomorrow is different.
Because you have the industry within. And finally, I guess, taking on board your part about the distribution, the opening the other side of the funnel, so that the distribution is also present and the need, so that there is a long-term sustainability of the creativity, I guess. Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us and listening to us. There was no translation, but we had more time to listen to you. So. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
An applause. A pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.